Hello and welcome to another short drawing lesson. This week I did a drawing workshop at the Austin 7 Centenary celebrations. So there was lots of fun stuff to sketch. And in the drawing class, because I had a lot of beginners, I sort of basically explained how to draw a car in side view. And afterwards, lots of people came up and said, well, how do I tackle a car in its three-quarter on? Because you've got lots of other complicated things to think about, like an extra vanishing point and circles that have become ellipses. So afterwards I went off and found a fun car to sketch, and I thought it'd be good just to explain what goes through my head when I try to tackle a subject like this. So you can see the first thing I did was draw the front axle, and I used my pencil aligned with the axle of the car that I could see and just worked out was it horizontal or did it have a slight tilt, and then I transferred that tilt to my page and drew the line at the same angle. Once you've got that, I could then add some circles to it for the front wheels. And if you've seen my other workshop tutorials on how to draw wheels in perspective, you'll know that the minor axis of your ellipse needs to sit on that axle line. Although in vintage cars, often the front wheels have a slight camber, so you need to tilt them out slightly. One thing I did need to work out was exactly how tall it was and how wide it was. And again, I did that with my pencil, and you'll often see artists reaching their arm out in front of them with their pencil and sliding their thumb up and down the end of it, trying to work out to measure something. That's what they're doing. So I measured, if you imagine I'm looking at the actual car rather than my sketch, I lined up the top of my pencil with my arm straight to the top of the wheel. Then I slid my thumb up till it met the bottom of the wheel. So I then had one wheel height unit of measurement, and then I could turn, without moving my thumb, the pencil at right angles and measure how wide the wheel was in relation to the height of the wheel. And I could see it was about 3/4 the width, 3/4 the height of the wheel. So I could draw an ellipse on that line with a width 3/4 of the height. And that kind of allows you to place that. Once you've got that, you need to know where to put the next wheel and how big that should be. And again, you can use this as your unit of measurement. You measure the height of the front wheel, perhaps go to the center of the front wheel, line that up and see, oh look, the middle of that wheel ends up exactly one wheel height away. So that's where the center of the next wheel needs to be. But how big will it be? Well, I'll take my height of the front wheel across again and see, oh, it needs to be about 3/4 of the height of this front wheel and about 2/3 of the width. So I can draw another ellipse. And at this point, I know I've got two circles on the correct angle and the correct size, which is quite a good start. And then I can carry on and do the same with the back wheel. So maybe here I measured the height of the front wheel and tried placing it here, sort of aligning it with the side of this wheel, and seeing, oh, that takes me almost to the middle of this wheel. All of this I would have done on the actual, comparing it to the actual car rather than my drawing, because it didn't exist yet. But it's all just a way of, the basic idea is that you draw the first few lines extremely carefully with lots of measuring and double checking, so that later on in the drawing everything will refer back to those. You'll be lining things up to these few lines that you did in the first few instance and relying on those being correct. So it's really important, just although this is light and sketchy, to spend a lot of time just double checking and making sure that these are absolutely the size they need to be and in the right place. Another nice thing with starting with the wheels like this is, well, there's a few good things actually. One is that you've got the most difficult part out of the way first. I used to leave these to the end and that was a bad idea. But also you can look at these 4 circles and think, does that feel like 4 circles or wheels arranged in 3D space? If one's wrong, it'll jump out like a sore thumb. You can spot it easily. So it's a good step. You can get these 4 down quite quickly and look at them and think, am I happy to carry on with this, or does something need fixing first? So here, I decided I could carry on without making any changes. And I started with the bottom edge of the body. And here's another way you can use your pencil. Rather than measuring things, you can use it to extend lines. So holding it up to the car again, you can extend a line and see what else it intersects with. So here, by extending the bottom edge of the door in this direction, I could see it ends up slightly lower than the center of my front wheel. Whereas if I extend it at the back, I could see it ended up slightly higher than the center of the back wheel. So I knew that it had to have a slight slope on it. So that's one useful thing. You can extend lines with your pencil as well as checking angles and measuring. Then I moved on to the radiator, which had nice vertical lines. And again, I will have measured the height of it and compared it to the height of something that I'd already drawn or measured before. So about 3/4 the height of the front wheel. And that's basically the process from then on, is just to go around double checking everything. So just measure one thing against something that you know you've done correctly and place it down in there to the right size and shape. I lightly put in some headlights there and the top edge of the bonnet, which I could see was kind of horizontal, before moving on to the screen, which I could see had a slight tilt on it. It wasn't quite vertical, it had a slight tilt. And the bottom of it joined up with the back edge of the bonnet here, which was kind of a vertical. And again, I just checked, did this vertical line up with the back edge of the wheel, or was it slightly in front, or was it slightly behind? It was slightly behind. So so before you draw anything, just see, should it line up with something else, or should it be slightly offset? For the tilt of the top edge of the screen, I knew that that was a horizontal line on the actual object, and that the axle is also a horizontal line. So those two objects, those two lines, would basically form a nice perspective grid going off to a vanishing point far off on the left. And that then gives you a rough perspective grid to work to. And I know that any other horizontal lines on the object would also need to fit nicely between those. So if there was a support between these lights, for instance, I would know that that would need to be nicely angled to sit between those, the top edge of the screen and the axle. There aren't many horizontal lines on this one, but that's the idea. And this sort of fanning shape would carry on higher and lower. The same kind of happens at the back here, but unfortunately, because the car's got a rake on it, it's tilted. It means that these lines aren't going off to a vanishing point on the horizon, they're slightly higher. At this point, it starts to get quite a bit easier, really, to add stuff, because you've got so much down already that it's kind of obvious where the new objects you're adding need to go. There's only one place, the back edge of the door can be, or the roof sits, it lines up with the top edge of the door, and all of those things. There's only so many places you could put it, and you can't really stray. You can't go too far wrong at this stage. But I'm still keeping it all very light, just in case. There's always the chance that I have made a mistake somewhere. And if you're using pen or a wax pencil that can't be erased, then you keep your options open for redrawing something in the correct place. At this stage, I've got the big stuff down, and I can then add all these smaller details like the vents and the handles, the exhaust. And it's only at that stage where I can start adding some shading. And I like to go for the really dark shapes first. Because up to this point, you've really just been sort of doing some careful measuring and getting landmarks down. Whereas the next stage, when you add the shading, it becomes more of an artistic process, and you're thinking about arranging shapes on the page. So each one of these dark shapes, you've got a few of them to arrange on your drawing, and you want them to be pleasing to the eye. So you kind of having to think about, well, maybe I'll let these fade out slightly to give a bit of depth, or I want to increase I want to draw people to a focal point, so I might go a bit heavier in a certain place, that kind of thing. So you're having to make more artistic decisions, I suppose, once you start adding shading. I'm also adding a shadow at this point to the bottom of the car. I find that really helps. So it stops the car looking like it's floating in space, and also it reinforces that perspective grid. It kind of because these lines will also go off to a vanishing point, it just kind of reinforces that 3D feel. And then the final tweaks are just because I'm working on white paper, I can't add white highlights to make the image pop. But I'm doing the opposite. I'm adding some really dark, sort of just little lines here and there that I pick out that I do in really quite heavy dark marks, and they just kind of add a nice bit of contrast to the picture, make it pop a bit. Yeah, and that's pretty much the end of the process. I hope you found that interesting. Oh, and one last thing, especially for Paul Shin, the Model A guy on YouTube, who's been desperately wondering how to pronounce my name. It's Stefan Marjoram, although I've also had Majoram and Majoram, and I even once got a skip delivered to Mr. Margarine. Any of those will do. Have a good week.